The bus was packed, filled with the hum of voices, the smell of stale coffee, and the screech of brakes at every stop. In the midst of it all sat Alex, his earbuds drowning out the world around him. He was in his own space, scrolling on his phone, a smirk forming at a joke a friend had just texted. A sudden stop jolted him, and he looked up briefly as an elderly man with a cane stepped onto the bus, searching for a place to sit. Alex noticed him, for a second considering moving, but shrugged and looked away. Why should he give up his spot? He was comfortable, settled, and besides, the guy could stand for a few minutes. The man approached, steadying himself on the rail beside Alex's seat, and Alex caught a glimpse of his face, a face lined with stories, with years, with the kind of quiet patience Alex had never bothered to understand. But he ignored it, shrugging off the feeling, focusing back on his phone. Around him, people began to whisper. A woman leaned over to her friend, murmuring, "Kids these days. No respect." Another nodded, casting a sharp look in Alex's direction. The elderly man staggered slightly as the bus jolted again, nearly losing his balance. For a second, Alex thought about standing up, but then he shrugged, pulling his hood further down, pretending not to notice. The silence that followed was filled with judgment, but Alex stayed put, feeling a prickle of discomfort. He was oblivious to the phone raised in the seat across from him, recording the moment that would soon be all over the internet, capturing the beginning of a journey that would change his life forever. The next morning, Alex woke up groggy, tossing his phone onto the bed without checking it. But a few minutes later, as he grabbed it to see the time, he noticed a flood of notifications. Text messages, social media alerts, even emails. His phone was blowing up in a way he'd never seen before. Confused, he opened his messages, scrolling past the first few comments. "Wow, dude, you're all over the place. I can't believe that's you. Didn't know you had that in you, man. Cold." Alex's stomach twisted as he clicked on a link someone had sent him. It opened to a video, and he stared at it, realizing instantly that it was the recording from yesterday on the bus. There he was, looking indifferent, sitting firmly in his seat while Mr. Jameson wobbled beside him, struggling to keep his balance. He could hear the whispers in the background, the murmurs of judgment. It was all there, the whole scene captured in vivid detail, and now it was everywhere. The caption at the top of the video read, "Teen refuses to give seat to elderly WWII veteran." Alex felt his face flush as he scrolled through the comments below. Disgraceful. What's wrong with kids these days? His parents must be so proud. Not. How can anyone act like this? That man's a hero. Every comment was like a jab, each one chipping away at the defenses he'd built up around himself. He could feel his heart pounding, a mix of shame and anger rising within him. The video was already viral, and his name was plastered all over it. Strangers from across the country were tearing into him. As he sat there, numb and staring at the screen, his phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from his grandmother. "Alex, I saw the video. I'm disappointed. Mr. Jameson is a friend of your grandfather's and deserves respect." Her words stung more than any comment from a stranger could. His grandmother was usually his biggest defender, his go-to for understanding, but now she was disappointed in him. She had mentioned Mr. Jameson before, but Alex had never really paid attention to the stories about his grandfather's friends from the war. Now, all those ignored conversations seemed to echo in his mind, filling him with regret. He felt trapped, the walls of his room closing in on him. What had seemed like a small, insignificant decision on the bus had snowballed into something massive, something he couldn't escape. But he was stubborn. Part of him wanted to shrug it off, convince himself it was just social media overreacting. Still, another part of him, deep down, knew he had messed up. After hours of scrolling through the comments and wrestling with his emotions, Alex finally put his phone down. But the feeling of shame lingered, nagging at him. He knew he had to do something, but he wasn't sure what. Just then, another notification popped up, a message from an old friend. It read, "You know you need to make this right. Start by finding Mr. Jameson." In the days that followed, Alex found it nearly impossible to escape the attention from the video. His classmates at school whispered when he walked by, his friends sent him teasing messages, and teachers gave him disappointed looks. He felt like every corner he turned, there was someone watching him, judging him. His reputation, something he hadn't cared much about until now, was unraveling in front of his eyes. During lunch, he overheard a conversation between two girls in his class. "Did you see that video? I can't believe he'd act like that. It's embarrassing," one of them said. "He deserves the backlash," the other replied. "That man fought in a war, and he couldn't even stand up for him?" Alex clenched his fists, feeling the anger bubble up again. Part of him wanted to confront them, to explain himself, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. The video spoke for itself. He'd already been judged, and nothing he said could change it. That evening, when he got home, his grandmother called him. Her voice was softer this time, a little gentler. "Alex, I know you're going through a lot right now," she said, "but sometimes we need these hard lessons to understand what really matters. Mr. Jameson, he's a good man. He was there for your grandfather when times were hard. They went through things you and I could never imagine. He deserves your respect." Alex stayed silent, feeling the weight of her words. Finally, he managed to say, "I know, Grandma. I just didn't think." "Then maybe it's time to start thinking," she replied, her tone kind but firm. "Sometimes, the best thing we can do is try to make things right." Alex hung up, her words echoing in his mind. He realized he couldn't ignore this any longer. He needed to find Mr. Jameson and apologize. But a part of him was terrified. Terrified that Mr. Jameson would reject his apology, that he would see Alex as just another selfish kid who didn't understand respect. The next day, Alex set out to find Mr. Jameson. He wasn't sure where to begin, so he went to the one place he thought he might find some answers, the local Veterans Community Center. The small building was nestled between a cafe and a bookstore, almost hidden away, as if it were a relic of the past. As he pushed open the door, a warm bell chimed, and he was greeted by the quiet murmur of voices. Veterans sat around small tables, drinking coffee and sharing stories. Alex felt a pang of nervousness as he realized he was out of place. These were men and women with a history, a shared bond he couldn't begin to understand. A woman at the front desk looked up, her kind face breaking into a smile. "Can I help you, young man?" Yeah. I was looking for Mr. Jameson," he said, feeling awkward. Her smile softened, and she gave a slight nod. "Mr. Jameson's in the back, working on the photo display. You can go on back. He's a friendly man." Alex followed her directions, his heart pounding with each step. When he rounded the corner, he spotted Mr. Jameson sitting alone, carefully arranging photos in a display case. The pictures showed moments from the war, groups of soldiers, families waving goodbye, friends smiling in uniform. He looked at the photos for a moment, captivated by the faces and stories he'd never taken time to think about. "Mr. Jameson," he finally managed, his voice hesitant. The elderly man looked up, his expression calm but watchful. "Yes? You're the young man from the bus." Alex felt his cheeks flush with shame. He took a deep breath, fighting the urge to turn around and leave. "Yes, sir, I am. I came to apologize. I know what I did was wrong. I didn't know who you were, and even if I had, it doesn't excuse how I acted." Mr. Jameson regarded him for a long moment, and Alex felt himself squirm under the man's gaze. He expected a harsh word, a dismissal, something to match the disappointment he'd seen online and from his grandmother. But instead, Mr. Jameson gave a slight smile. "I appreciate you coming here, son," he said, his tone gentle but firm. "Most people don't bother to make amends, but respect doesn't just come from a seat on a bus. It's something you learn over time, and you're on that path now." Alex felt a wave of relief, mixed with something he hadn't expected. Gratitude. "Thank you. I want to make it right. If there's anything I can do." Mr. Jameson gave a thoughtful nod. "Well, we could always use an extra hand around here, helping with events, keeping this place tidy. might give you a little insight into what some of us have lived through and what we continue to carry." The offer surprised Alex, but he found himself nodding eagerly. "I'd like that. I really would." Mr. Jameson smiled again, this time with a twinkle of amusement in his eyes. "All right then. How about you come by on Saturday? We have a community event coming up, and I think you'll find it enlightening." On Saturday morning, Alex arrived early at the community center, feeling a blend of nervousness and curiosity. Mr. Jameson greeted him with a nod and handed him a broom, instructing him to sweep up the entryway before the veterans started arriving. As he worked, he saw a few veterans trickle in, each one stopping to shake hands with Mr. Jameson or offer him a nod. They all seemed to respect him, treating him like a leader, someone they trusted and admired. Alex realized he hadn't seen this side of Mr. Jameson, the quiet yet commanding respect he commanded, not through force, but through the strength of his character. After he finished cleaning, Mr. Jameson invited him to join a small group of veterans who were sitting in a circle, sharing coffee and stories. Alex hesitated, feeling out of place, but Mr. Jameson waved him over. "Come on, Alex. You're here to learn, aren't you?" Alex took a seat, feeling the weight of everyone's attention. The veterans didn't seem to judge him. In fact, they welcomed him with smiles and nods. One of the men, a stocky gentleman named Joe, began sharing a story about his time overseas, recalling the camaraderie and courage of the soldiers he served with. Alex listened, captivated by the details, the hardships, the fear, the bonds forged under fire. One by one, each veteran shared a piece of their past, not in a boastful way, but as if passing down something sacred. They spoke of friends lost, moments of bravery, and times when fear had gripped them but hadn't stopped them from pushing forward. Sitting there, Alex felt a new respect taking root. These were ordinary people who had faced extraordinary circumstances, sacrificing their youth and risking their lives for the people back home. He realized then that he had judged them too quickly, never considering the depth of their lives or the weight of their experiences. As the conversation continued, Mr. Jameson shared his own story, of a battle that left him injured, of the friend he'd lost in the line of duty, and of the courage it had taken to go on. Alex listened in awe, feeling the depth of each word, each memory. When the meeting wrapped up, Mr. Jameson placed a hand on Alex's shoulder. "Respect isn't something you just give or receive, Alex. It's something you build, step by step. Come back next week, if you're willing. There's still plenty for you to learn." Alex nodded, feeling a determination he hadn't felt before. He knew he was just beginning to understand, but he was willing to put in the effort to make it right. Alex's weekends gradually became devoted to the Veterans Community Center. Every Saturday, he arrived early, helping with chores and organizing events, then sitting down to listen as the veterans shared their stories. He started seeing each of them as more than just older folks. They were individuals with stories, lives, and sacrifices that deserved honor and respect. With every story, Alex learned something new about bravery, resilience, and loss. The more he listened, the more he felt his own perspective changing. He found himself thinking less about his reputation and more about what it truly meant to live with integrity. One afternoon, Mr. Jameson took him aside. "You've come a long way, Alex. I can see the change in you. But remember, real respect means carrying these lessons forward, not just keeping them here." Alex nodded, feeling the gravity of Mr. Jameson's words. For the first time, he felt proud of the path he was on, not because of what others thought, but because of the values he was starting to live by. As Alex left the center that day, he found himself formulating a plan, a way to bring the stories of these veterans to the broader community, to help others understand the depth of their sacrifice. He didn't yet know how he'd accomplish it, but he was determined to find a way. As the weeks went by, Alex's admiration for the veterans grew, and he became more invested in their stories. The lessons he learned from Mr. Jameson and the others felt too important to keep to himself, and he knew he needed to do something more than just listen. The veterans' stories needed to be heard and remembered by the community. One Saturday, after another morning of helping out at the community center, Alex gathered the courage to share his idea with Mr. Jameson. "Mr. Jameson," he began, his voice steady but with a hint of nervousness, "I've been thinking. What if we organized a public event to honor all of you? I mean, I know people might read a story or two online, but I want them to meet you to hear your stories directly." Mr. Jameson raised an eyebrow, a small smile playing on his lips. "You want to organize an event? That's a big undertaking." Alex nodded, excitement building in his chest. "I know, but I'm ready to take it on. You've all taught me so much, and I want others to feel what I've felt. I think people would really benefit from hearing what you've been through, from learning what it means to sacrifice for others." Mr. Jameson thought for a moment, his expression thoughtful. Finally, he gave a nod. "All right, Alex. I think it's a fine idea. If you're serious about it, I'll help you get started. But you'll need to be prepared for the work. Organizing an event like this isn't easy." Alex's heart swelled with determination. "I'm ready. I want to do this." Mr. Jameson patted him on the shoulder, his smile proud. "Then let's get to work, Alex. We've got a lot to do." Over the next few weeks, Alex poured himself into planning the event. He enlisted the help of his friends, family, and even some of his classmates, explaining the purpose behind the gathering and sharing the veterans' stories. Slowly but surely, people began to volunteer their time and resources, donating food, decorations, and equipment for the event. The entire town started buzzing with anticipation, curious to hear the stories of the veterans they'd seen around town for years but had never really known. During one of their planning meetings, Mr. Jameson took a moment to pull Alex aside. "You know, this means a lot to us, Alex. Many of us have lived our lives quietly, without expecting recognition. But having someone from your generation take an interest, it's something special." Alex felt a warmth in his chest as he looked at Mr. Jameson. "I wouldn't be here without you, Mr. Jameson. You've all taught me so much. This is the least I can do." They continued their preparations, organizing speeches, arranging for a local band to play, and creating displays of photographs and memorabilia from the veterans' time in service. Alex even reached out to local media, hoping to bring attention to the event and spread the veterans' stories to a larger audience. The day before the event, as he stood in the decorated hall, Alex took a moment to reflect on how far he'd come. He'd gone from being the kid who refused a seat to a man who now understood what it meant to respect others. Tomorrow, he'd get the chance to show the veterans, and the whole town, just how much he had changed. The day of the event arrived, and the community center buzzed with excitement. Alex stood by the entrance, greeting people as they arrived, his nervous energy masked by a calm smile. Friends, family members, neighbors, and even some teachers had shown up, all eager to see what the event was about. The veterans sat in a row at the front of the room, each wearing their medals and ribbons. Mr. Jameson sat among them, his posture straight, his face a mixture of pride and gratitude. Alex could tell this day meant a lot to him, and seeing the veterans smile filled him with a sense of accomplishment. As the event began, Alex stepped up to the podium, taking a deep breath as he looked out over the crowd. He'd practiced his speech a dozen times, but standing there in front of everyone made his nerves spike. He steadied himself, remembering Mr. Jameson's advice. Respect isn't just in words, but in actions. "Thank you all for being here today," he began, his voice strong but filled with emotion. "I'm honored to stand here, not just to speak, but to share the stories of some incredible people who have changed my life." He glanced over at the veterans, his gaze landing on Mr. Jameson. "A few months ago, I made a mistake, a big one. I showed disrespect to a man who deserved so much more, but he didn't hold it against me. Instead, he and the other veterans here opened their doors, shared their stories, and taught me what respect and sacrifice really mean." Alex went on to share what he had learned from each veteran, honoring their experiences and highlighting their bravery and dedication. As he spoke, the room fell silent, each word carrying the weight of his sincerity and the depth of his gratitude. When he finished his speech, the room erupted in applause. Alex felt overwhelmed by the response, but it was the proud smile on Mr. Jameson's face that meant the most. The event wasn't just a success. It was a moment of redemption and a new beginning for Alex. However, just as he stepped down from the podium, a reporter approached, microphone in hand, ready to spread the veteran's stories even further. Alex realized that this journey was only just beginning. The reporter's story, along with the video of Alex's speech, went viral overnight. This time, the internet's response was vastly different. People applauded Alex's transformation and praised his efforts to honor the veterans. Comments poured in, thanking him for showing respect to those who had served and encouraging others to do the same. Alex found himself receiving messages from people across the country who had been moved by his story and inspired to reconnect with their own family members who had served. The experience was humbling, and it reminded him of the power of his actions, the impact that even one person could have when they chose to make things right. Everywhere he went, people now recognized him, but not as the rude teen on the bus. Instead, he was seen as someone who had learned from his mistakes, someone who had grown. It was a reputation he was proud of and one he was determined to live up to. One day, Mr. Jameson approached him with a surprising offer. "Alex, you've got a gift for sharing stories. How would you feel about helping us record these stories, so future generations can hear them too?" Eager to carry forward the legacy of Mr. Jameson and the other veterans, Alex agreed to help document their stories. He gathered recording equipment, notepads, and even invited a few volunteers to join him in the project. Each recording session was filled with laughter, tears, and deep respect as the veterans shared the most meaningful moments of their lives. With every story he recorded, Alex felt his own life becoming richer, his own purpose clearer. The experiences he once took for granted were now moments of reflection, and he found himself developing a new level of appreciation for the people around him, even those he didn't know personally. The project eventually grew beyond the community center, attracting interest from other veterans and families. Alex realized that he was preserving a piece of history, one that was often overlooked, but that carried immense value. As the project gained momentum, Alex received an invitation to speak at a larger event, a gathering of veterans from across the state. It was a chance to share his story of transformation and the lessons he'd learned. Nervous but determined, Alex accepted, ready to carry Mr. Jameson's legacy even further. The state veterans event was held in a large hall packed with veterans, families, and community members from across the region. Alex stood backstage, nervously adjusting the tie he'd borrowed from his dad. The size of the crowd was overwhelming. He'd never spoken in front of so many people before, but then he glanced down at the medal Mr. Jameson had lent him, a WWII commendation that symbolized everything he'd come to respect and cherish. As he took the stage, the room quieted. Alex looked out over the faces in the crowd, a mixture of young and old, each pair of eyes carrying its own story. Taking a deep breath, he began. "Thank you all for being here. My name is Alex, and a few months ago I was the kid who refused to give up his seat to an elderly man on a bus." He let the words hang, hearing the murmurs ripple through the audience. But that man didn't respond with anger. Instead, he taught me more than I ever thought possible about respect, courage, and the sacrifices that came before my time. He shared the journey he'd been on since that day on the bus, his connection with Mr. Jameson, the lessons he'd learned from the veterans, and the project that had grown beyond anything he'd imagined. These men and women, they fought battles I'll never fully understand. They sacrificed their youth, their dreams, and sometimes their lives for the rest of us. And it's our job to honor that by remembering and learning from their experiences. As he spoke, he saw nods of approval, teary eyes, and even a few hands pressed over hearts. By the time he finished, the room erupted in applause. But it wasn't the applause that filled Alex with pride. It was the feeling that he was helping carry forward the veterans' legacy, amplifying their voices for others to hear. After his speech, several people approached him, asking how they could get involved or where they could learn more. A local historian even offered to help fund his project so that Alex could continue documenting veteran stories. That evening, as he left the venue, Mr. Jameson handed him an envelope. "You've done well, Alex, but there's one more story left for you to learn." Inside the envelope was a letter addressed to Alex, written by his late grandfather, a man he'd never had the chance to meet. Alex felt a new journey beginning, one that would take him deeper into his own family's history. That night, Alex sat on his bed, staring at the envelope in his hands. He took a deep breath, then opened it carefully, unfolding the yellowed paper inside. His grandfather's handwriting was neat but strong, and as he began to read, he could almost feel the man's presence in the room. Dear Alex, if you're reading this, it means you've found your way to Mr. Jameson. He was my brother in arms, my closest friend, and someone I trusted with my life. I always hoped you'd get to know him, and it brings me peace to know you have. There's so much I wish I could have told you myself, so many stories of courage and heartache. But I want you to know that our fight wasn't just for freedom. It was for the future, for you and everyone who came after us. If there's one lesson I can pass down to you, it's this. Live with respect for those around you, and carry on the legacy we left for you. I've always believed you'd make us proud, Alex. I know you will. Alex sat for a long time after reading the letter, the words sinking in. He'd always known his grandfather was a part of his family's history, but now he felt connected to him in a way he hadn't before. The man who had fought for his future was no longer just a distant memory. He was real, someone Alex could honor through his actions. Inspired by his grandfather's words, Alex knew what he needed to do next. He decided to turn his project into a full-scale initiative, creating a platform to share the veterans' stories and inviting younger generations to learn from them. He knew he would need more than just his phone to do it, but the letter gave him the courage to push forward. Over the next few months, Alex dedicated himself to transforming his project. With the support of the local historian, he developed a website called Legacy Voices, a digital archive for the stories of veterans across the country. He recorded interviews, archived letters, and posted photos of veterans from various wars, creating an immersive experience where people could connect with history firsthand. He reached out to schools, encouraging them to incorporate the stories into their curriculum. Teachers responded with enthusiasm, inviting Alex to speak to their students, helping bridge the gap between generations. He collaborated with other historians and veterans organizations, expanding his project's reach. One afternoon, as Alex and Mr. Jameson worked together to scan old photographs for the website, Mr. Jameson paused, looking at Alex with a proud smile. "You've given us a voice, Alex. This isn't just about remembering the past. It's about building a future where respect and understanding are part of everyone's story." Alex nodded, his heart swelling with pride. He'd started this journey full of guilt and shame, but now it was something bigger than himself. It was a movement of remembrance, one that was helping people of all ages appreciate the sacrifices of those who came before. As the website gained traction, Alex was invited to speak at a national veterans conference where he'd have the chance to share his project with leaders and veterans from all over the country. It was the ultimate opportunity to honor his grandfather's legacy and the lessons Mr. Jameson had taught him. The conference hall was enormous, filled with veterans, their families, and leaders from across the country. Alex took the stage, feeling both the weight of his responsibility and the support of everyone who had helped him reach this point. He glanced at Mr. Jameson, sitting proudly in the front row, and thought of his grandfather's letter. As he began to speak, he shared his journey from the boy who refused a seat to a young man dedicated to preserving the stories of those who had fought for his future. He spoke about the lessons he'd learned, the friendships he'd built, and the responsibility he felt to honor the legacy of every veteran who had shared their story with him. The audience was captivated, some nodding with understanding, others wiping away tears. By the time he finished, the room filled with applause, and Alex felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude and purpose. He was no longer just speaking for himself, but for every veteran who had ever sacrificed for the greater good. After the speech, veterans approached him, thanking him for his dedication, sharing pieces of their own stories, and expressing their hope that his work would continue to inspire future generations. As Alex left the stage, a representative from a major veterans organization approached him with an offer to fund his project, ensuring that Legacy Voices could grow into a permanent resource for preserving veterans' stories. It was a chance to take his work to a new level, and Alex realized that his journey was only just beginning. Years later, Alex stood at the community center once more, now a full-fledged historian and advocate for veterans' history. The Legacy Voices project had grown into a national initiative with digital archives, educational materials, and a team dedicated to preserving the stories of veterans across the country. Schools, universities, and communities used the platform to teach the next generation about respect, honor, and sacrifice. Mr. Jameson had passed on, but his memory was alive in every story Alex helped preserve. Alex wore the medal Mr. Jameson had given him that day, feeling the weight of its legacy, knowing he was part of something much larger than himself. As he stood before a new group of young students at the community center, Alex shared his story, from the fateful bus ride to his journey of transformation. He saw the same curiosity in their eyes that he'd once felt, and he knew that the lessons he'd learned would live on, passed down from generation to generation. The story of the rude teen who refused to give seat to elderly man had transformed into something far greater, a legacy of respect, learning, and remembrance. Through his journey, Alex had discovered that honoring the past was not just a duty, but a way to shape a future where respect and gratitude were valued. And as he finished his story, he looked out over the audience, feeling the quiet pride of those who had come before him. The legacy continued, stronger than ever, carried forward with every story shared, every lesson learned, and every life changed. A few years had passed since Alex expanded Legacy Voices into a national platform, and the impact had only grown. Now, he was a regular speaker at schools, community events, and veterans gatherings, sharing stories of courage and sacrifice, keeping the memory of people like Mr. Jameson alive. But the platform was more than just a way to honor veterans. It had become a bridge connecting generations, helping young people see the past as part of their own lives. One afternoon, as he was organizing new archives in the community center, a young volunteer named Mia approached him. She was in high school, full of energy, with a keen interest in history. "Alex," she began, "I was going through some of the old recordings and I found Mr. Jameson's story. It's incredible. I had no idea someone could go through so much and still be so kind." Alex smiled, remembering the quiet strength Mr. Jameson had always shown. "Mr. Jameson taught me more than I could ever put into words. He was patient, wise, and he helped me understand that respect is something you live, not just something you say." Mia nodded thoughtfully. Do you think I could interview some veterans myself? I want to be part of this, to make sure their stories don't get forgotten." Alex saw a spark in her eyes, one that reminded him of the curiosity that had driven him all those years ago. He placed a hand on her shoulder, feeling the weight of his journey and the joy of seeing it continue through someone else. "Absolutely, Mia," he said. "You're exactly the kind of person this project needs. Legacy Voices was never meant to be mine alone. It belongs to all of us, and it's up to people like you to carry it forward." With a mentor-like presence, Alex began showing Mia the ropes, guiding her through the art of interviewing, preserving stories, and treating each veteran with the honor and respect they deserved. As they worked side by side, he saw her passion grow, and he knew that the legacy Mr. Jameson had passed to him was in good hands. With the anniversary of Mr. Jameson's passing approaching, Alex decided to organize a special tribute in his honor. He reached out to the veterans community and the families of those Mr. Jameson had served with, inviting them to gather for a ceremony. It was a chance to remember not just Mr. Jameson's service, but the quiet impact he'd had on so many lives. The ceremony was held at the community center, now adorned with banners and photographs capturing Mr. Jameson's life. Veterans and family members shared stories recounting the strength, kindness, and integrity he'd displayed both in and out of service. The room was filled with laughter, tears, and memories that brought Mr. Jameson to life once more. When it was Alex's turn to speak, he approached the podium, feeling the familiar mixture of pride and emotion. He took a deep breath, looking at the faces of the people Mr. Jameson had touched. "Mr. Jameson taught me what it means to live a life of respect," Alex began, his voice steady. "He was more than a veteran. He was a friend, a mentor, and the person who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself. He taught me that honoring the past means building a future where we remember, learn, and grow from the sacrifices others have made for us." He paused, glancing at Mia and the younger volunteers who had joined him in preserving veterans' stories. "Today, we don't just honor Mr. Jameson's memory. We commit to carrying his legacy forward, to preserving these stories, and to living with the same integrity he showed every day." The room erupted in applause, and Alex stepped down, his heart full of gratitude. After the ceremony, people came forward, sharing memories and expressing their appreciation for the impact Legacy Voices had made on their lives. In the months following Mr. Jameson's tribute, Legacy Voices continued to expand. With support from historians, teachers, and volunteers like Mia, the project grew into an interactive online museum complete with interviews, photos, and even virtual reality experiences that allowed people to step into the past. Schools from across the country began using the platform as part of their history curriculum, ensuring that each generation would learn from the veterans' stories. Alex found himself in a new role as a mentor, guiding young volunteers through the work he had started and helping them find their own connections to the past. He saw in them the same curiosity and respect that Mr. Jameson had instilled in him, and it filled him with pride to see how far they'd come. One day, a teacher from his old high school invited him to speak to her class. As he shared his story, he noticed a young student in the back, leaning forward, completely captivated. After the class, the student approached him. "Mr. Alex," he said shyly, "I never thought history could be so real. I want to be part of this, like you." Alex smiled, recognizing a familiar spark. History isn't just in books, it's in the lives of people around us. If you're interested, come by the community center and we'll get you started. As the student walked away, Alex realized the project's impact was now reaching a new generation, inspiring others to join and continue the work of honoring and preserving stories of the past. Years passed, and Alex watched as Legacy Voices grew into something he'd never imagined. What had started as a way to make amends had transformed into a lifelong mission, a movement that bridged generations. The veterans' stories had become a living history, shared across the country, and Alex had become a respected advocate for preserving those stories. One day, as he walked through the community center, now a full museum dedicated to veterans, he stopped in front of a familiar photograph of Mr. Jameson. Looking at it, he felt a wave of gratitude wash over him, realizing how much one man's quiet influence had changed his life. As he stood there, a young girl approached him, tugging at his sleeve. "Mr. Alex, my grandpa's a veteran. Do you think his story could go on Legacy Voices too?" Alex knelt down, smiling at her. "Of course. Every story deserves to be heard, and who knows, maybe one day you'll help tell it." Alex watched her run back to her family, feeling a sense of fulfillment that words couldn't capture. Mr. Jameson's legacy, and the legacy of so many others, was now alive in every story, every life touched, and every lesson passed down. And, as he turned to leave, Alex knew that the work he'd started would continue long after him. The legacy of respect, sacrifice, and remembrance would live on, carried forward by the next generation, a testament to the journey that had begun with a simple, humbling lesson on a crowded bus. In the years following the establishment of the community center as a full museum, Legacy Voices expanded internationally. Veterans from other countries reached out, wanting their own stories documented, and soon the project was archiving not just American veterans but those from allied countries around the world. Each new story added depth, revealing the interconnectedness of lives across continents and the shared experiences of sacrifice and resilience. One day, Alex received an invitation to speak at an international forum on historical preservation. The event, held in France, was dedicated to fostering global unity by preserving and sharing wartime stories. Arriving at the event, Alex was struck by the diversity in the room. Veterans, historians, students, and advocates from every corner of the world, all gathered to honor the past and its lessons. Standing on stage, he felt the familiar nervousness he'd once struggled with, but it was quickly overtaken by a sense of pride and gratitude. He began his speech, sharing the story of Mr. Jameson, his own journey, and the impact of legacy voices. As he spoke, he could see the audience connecting to the story, recognizing the universal themes of courage, unity, and respect. History, he said, his voice steady and clear, isn't just about the past. It's about the stories we choose to carry forward and the lessons we pass down. The veterans who sacrificed for us did so for a future they couldn't see, a future that is now our responsibility to preserve and protect. When he finished, the applause was thunderous. People approached him afterward, some sharing their own family stories of war and sacrifice, others expressing gratitude for his work. It was humbling to see how far legacy voices had come, connecting people from all walks of life and bridging generations across borders. One of the organizers approached Alex with a proposal to establish Legacy Voices chapters in several countries, allowing young people globally to take part in preserving and sharing their own veterans' stories. The idea filled him with excitement, realizing the project's potential to foster understanding and respect worldwide. Returning home, Alex began laying the groundwork for Legacy Voices chapters around the world. He reached out to students, educators, and veterans organizations in different countries, helping them establish their own archives and connect with local veterans. The goal was to create a unified platform where anyone could access stories of bravery and resilience from around the world, experiencing history through a global lens. Soon, partnerships were established in Canada, the UK, Australia, and Japan, each branch adding unique stories to the digital archive. Young people from these countries volunteered, interviewing their local veterans, cataloging stories, and sharing them online. Each new chapter created a tapestry of interconnected lives, each story unique, yet part of a greater narrative of courage and humanity. As Alex worked with these new chapters, he began to see the full power of the project. Veterans' experiences, once isolated to specific communities, were now part of a global heritage, a collective memory that crossed borders and united people through shared values. The younger volunteers were inspired, driven to honor the sacrifices made in their countries and recognize the lives impacted by wars long past. One evening, he received a message from Mia, who was leading the Canadian chapter. "Alex, I interviewed a veteran today who told me a story that reminded me of Mr. Jameson. She said that the reason she survived was because of the friends she made, who gave her the strength to go on. It feels amazing to be part of something so much bigger than myself." Reading her message, Alex felt a surge of pride and contentment. The work he'd started was being carried forward by a generation that was just as passionate and committed to preserving history. On the eve of Legacy Voices expanding into 10 more countries, Alex received an email from a young historian in Germany who had a surprising piece of information about Alex's grandfather's unit, details that could deepen his understanding of his own family's history. Intrigued by the email, Alex arranged a video call with the German historian, a young man named Lucas. On the call, Lucas shared his findings. Alex's grandfather had served in a unit that had cooperated with German resistance forces during WWII. These forces, made up of civilians, had risked everything to help Allied soldiers, fighting against the oppressive regime at great personal cost. As Lucas described his research, he mentioned that some of the records included letters and accounts from the German resistance. "One of the letters mentions your grandfather specifically," Lucas said, sending over a digital copy of the document. "It appears he and a local family helped each other survive during a difficult winter." Reading the letter, Alex was moved to tears. He'd known his grandfather as a hero, but seeing this document, learning that his grandfather had worked with people from across enemy lines to survive and protect each other, gave him a new perspective. It showed him that even in the darkest of times, people had found ways to build bridges, to support and uplift each other despite their differences. Feeling a surge of inspiration, Alex realized that the spirit of cooperation and respect his grandfather had shown was the same spirit he was now nurturing through Legacy Voices. His grandfather's legacy was alive in every story shared, every chapter opened, and every young person inspired to carry history forward. Alex decided to visit Germany, where Lucas had arranged for him to meet the descendants of the family his grandfather had worked with. It was a chance to not only honor his grandfather's legacy, but to deepen the global connections he was helping build through his work. Arriving in Germany, Alex was greeted warmly by Lucas and the descendants of the family mentioned in his grandfather's letter. Together, they visited the historical sites where his grandfather and the German resistance had worked together. Walking through the snow-covered forests and old villages, Alex felt a profound connection to the past, sensing the courage and unity that had existed between these people, once separated by war, who had chosen compassion over division. In a small ceremony, the family presented Alex with a replica of a medallion his grandfather had given their ancestor as a token of gratitude. Standing there, holding the medallion, Alex felt a deep sense of unity, a reminder that history wasn't just about remembering the past, but about building connections that would shape the future. Returning home, he wrote an article about the experience, sharing the story of his grandfather and the German family who had helped him. The piece was widely read, inspiring people worldwide and sparking conversations about unity, understanding, and the strength of human connections. As Legacy Voices continued to grow, its reach expanded far beyond anything Alex had imagined. Schools, universities, and communities around the world now used the platform to teach about respect, sacrifice, and shared humanity. People were connecting with their pasts, finding common ground with others, and building a culture of remembrance and gratitude. One day, as Alex visited the community center, now a vibrant museum and educational hub, a young volunteer approached him, holding a notebook filled with questions. "Mr. Alex, I've been reading about Mr. Jameson, and I think his story is amazing. I want to help share more stories like his. Do you think I could help with Legacy Voices someday?" Alex knelt down, smiling at the young volunteer with a sense of fulfillment. "Absolutely. Legacy Voices is for everyone. We're all part of this story, and each one of us has the power to carry it forward." Looking around the center, Alex saw generations, veterans, young volunteers, families, all connected through the stories they shared, stories of courage, resilience, and hope. Mr. Jameson's influence, his quiet dignity and strength had sparked a movement that would live on, generation after generation. Years later, Alex stood before a memorial wall at the Legacy Voices Global Headquarters, a building dedicated to honoring veterans and their stories from all over the world. Engraved on the wall were the names of those whose lives had shaped the project: Mr. Jameson, Alex's grandfather, and countless others who had left their mark. As he read the names, he felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that the work would continue long after him, passed down like an heirloom to each new generation. Legacy Voices had become more than a project. It was a living testament to the power of remembrance, a bridge connecting past and future, a reminder that respect, unity, and understanding were the true legacies of every veteran. And, as Alex turned to leave, he glanced at a group of young volunteers leading a tour, their voices filled with respect and enthusiasm as they shared the stories that had become part of their lives. With a quiet smile, Alex walked away, knowing that the legacy he had built would continue to echo through history, a lasting tribute to the courage and humanity of those who came before. Years into his work, Alex began to see the legacy he'd built taking on a life of its own. Young people from around the world were joining Legacy Voices, inspired by its message and mission. It had become a global movement, with volunteers, educators, and families connecting across continents. The project's impact reached far and wide, spreading the message of respect, unity, and remembrance that had begun with a simple act of humility. One day, Alex, now in his early 40s, stood before the Legacy Voices Board of Directors. He had guided the project for decades, and now he was ready to pass the leadership on to a new generation. Mia, one of the earliest volunteers, was by his side, ready to take on the role as the new director. She had grown up with Legacy Voices, and her passion for honoring veterans and their stories was unwavering. As he handed her the official documents, Alex felt a mix of nostalgia and pride. "You're going to do great things, Mia," he said. "You know the heart of this project, and I have no doubt you'll lead it well." Mia nodded, her eyes bright. "I'll do my best, Alex. This legacy, it's something I'll carry forward with all the respect it deserves." After the meeting, Alex visited the museum one last time in his official capacity. As he walked through the halls, he reflected on the journey, feeling a deep sense of closure. After stepping down, Alex focused on his family and personal projects, though he remained a guiding figure in Legacy Voices. He began writing a memoir, capturing his own journey from a thoughtless teenager to an advocate for veteran stories. In his memoir, he detailed not only the lessons he'd learned from Mr. Jameson, but also the connections he'd made with families, veterans, and communities around the world. One afternoon, while writing, he came across an old letter from his grandfather, the letter that had set him on his path of discovery. The words felt just as powerful as they had when he first read them, and he decided to include the letter in his memoir, a tribute to the man who had quietly shaped his life. As he typed the final words, he felt the peace of having honored his grandfather, Mr. Jameson, and every veteran who had shared their story with him. The memoir would be his final contribution to Legacy Voices, a way to ensure the story of his transformation would inspire others. Years later, at the 50th anniversary celebration of Legacy Voices, Alex, now an elder statesman of sorts, attended as a guest. The event was held at the Legacy Voices Global Headquarters, which had become a center for education and historical preservation. Mia, now the director, stood at the podium, addressing an audience filled with young volunteers, veterans, families, and supporters. "Today," Mia began, "we honor those who came before us and the people who had the courage to share their stories, making history a part of our lives. And we owe a special thanks to the man who helped bring Legacy Voices to life, Alex, who taught us that respect, courage, and remembrance can change the world." The crowd erupted in applause, and Alex felt a quiet pride. He knew that this movement was no longer his alone. It belonged to everyone. When the applause subsided, Mia announced the unveiling of a new exhibit dedicated to the original founders of Legacy Voices, including Mr. Jameson and Alex's grandfather. After the ceremony, a young volunteer approached Alex, her eyes bright with excitement. "Mr. Alex," she said, "I read your memoir. I feel so connected to history now, and I want to help make a difference, just like you did." Alex smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You already are," he said. "Each story you help preserve, each person you listen to, that's how you change the world. It's in the small moments that the real legacy lives on." As he left the museum, Alex glanced back one last time, feeling the weight of the journey he'd traveled. The legacy was safe, growing stronger with every story told, every lesson learned. Mr. Jameson's influence and the influence of every veteran would live on in the voices of the next generation, a tribute to the past, carried forward with respect and honor. And with that, Alex walked away, content in knowing that Legacy Voices would echo on, a bridge between generations, forever preserving the stories that defined humanity.